Can you live with knowing that your daughter's innocence was taken from her and doing nothing about it? Can you live with knowing that the person who hurt her is walking free, unpunished? Stanley shook his head. If you love me, Nne, you will let this go. We can't let this destroy our family. If you refuse, I will end this marriage. Hello everyone, my name is Adugo and you're watching the African Tales channel by Adugo. Before we dive into today's video, please kindly click on that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. Now, let's get into the story. Nne was a kind woman, always caring for her family. She loved her husband, Stanley, very much. They had a happy home with their beautiful daughter, Mercy, who was just 9 years old. Mercy was a cheerful girl, always running around the house, laughing and playing. She was the light of their lives. One day, Stanley's elder sister, Divine, called them with good news. Her son, Oliver, had just gained admission to a polytechnic in Kano State. Divine was so proud of him, but the school was far from where they lived, and she didn't want Oliver to stay in the school lodge. Stanley, being a good man, suggested that Oliver should come and stay with them. That way, he would be close to school and be with family. Nne agreed, though she was a bit worried about having a young man in the house, but she trusted her husband's judgment. So Oliver moved in with them, and at first, everything seemed fine. Oliver was quiet and kept to himself most of the time. He would go to school in the morning and return in the evening, greeting everyone politely. But after some time, Nne noticed something strange about Mercy. Her once bubbly daughter was now withdrawn and sad. She didn't laugh as much as she used to, and sometimes Nne would catch her staring blankly at the wall. Nne's heart ached. She knew something was wrong, but Mercy wouldn't tell her anything. Nne decided to watch Mercy closely. She wanted to find out what was going on. She observed her daughter for a few days, and then, one evening, she noticed something that made her heart stop. Mercy was walking with difficulty, and there was a look of pain on her face. Nne's stomach churned as she realized what might have happened. She took Mercy aside and gently asked her what was wrong. Mercy shook her head, refusing to speak. Nne's worry grew into fear. She knew her daughter was hiding something terrible. After a long time of coaxing and pleading, Mercy finally broke down in tears. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I am scared." Nne's heart broke at the sight of her daughter's tears. She held her close, trying to comfort her. "It's okay, my child," she said softly. "You can tell me anything. I'll protect you." Mercy looked up at her with frightened eyes. "Mama, he said he will hurt me if I tell." "Who?" Nne asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who did this to you?" After a long silence, Mercy finally spoke. "Oliver," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oliver disvirgined me, Mama." Nne felt like the ground had been pulled from under her feet. Her hands trembled as she hugged Mercy tightly. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could this have happened in her own home? Anger, sorrow, and confusion flooded her mind. She knew she had to tell Stanley. He was in the living room watching TV when Nne walked in, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She sat down next to him and told him everything Mercy had said. Stanley's face darkened as he listened, but he didn't say a word. When Nne finished, she looked at him, waiting for him to say something. Anything. Stanley stood up and picked up his phone. Nne watched as he called his sister, Divine. He told her what had happened, his voice steady but cold. Divine was shocked and immediately came over to their house. She didn't say much, just apologized and quickly took Oliver away, renting an apartment for him nearby. Nne thought that was the end of it, but later that night, Stanley came to her with a serious look on his face. Nne, he said, I want you to let this matter go. For the sake of our family, please let it go. Nne couldn't believe what she was hearing. Stanley, our daughter has been hurt. We can't just let this go. But Stanley shook his head. If you love me, Nne, you will let this go. We can't let this destroy our family. If you refuse, I will end this marriage. Nne stared at him, her heart breaking into million pieces. How could he ask this of her? How could he put their marriage above their daughter's pain? Tears filled her eyes as she realized that the man she loved was asking her to make an impossible choice. Nne was torn. She wanted to protect Mercy, but she also didn't want to lose her marriage. She felt trapped, confused, and utterly alone. She thought of losing Stanley was unbearable, but so was the idea of letting Oliver get away with what he had done. The pain in her heart was almost too much to bear, and she didn't know what to do. All she knew was that whatever choice she made, nothing would ever be the same again. Nne spent the entire night tossing and turning, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't escape. Mercy had finally fallen asleep, her small face still stained with tears. Nne watched her daughter, feeling an overwhelming sense of guilt and anger. She had always promised to protect Mercy, but now she felt like she had failed her in the worst way possible. When morning came, Nne felt drained, both physically and emotionally. She got up quietly and wanting to wake Mercy, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. As she cracked eggs into a bowl, her hands trembled. The sound of the eggshells breaking seemed to echo in her ears. The words Stanley had spoken the night before played over and over in her mind. If you love me, Nne, you will let this go. How could he say that? How could he put their marriage above their daughter's safety? The more Nne thought about it, the angrier she became. But she was also scared. Stanley was her husband, the man she had built a life with. If he left her, what would she do? How would she explain this to Mercy? How would she face the world as a single mother, carrying the weight of this secret? Nne was lost in thought when Stanley walked into the kitchen. He looked at her with a soft expression, but Nne could see the tension in his eyes. He approached her cautiously, as if he knew how fragile the situation was. Nne, have you thought about what I said? Stanley asked, his voice low and gentle. Nne didn't respond immediately. She continued whisking the eggs, trying to gather her thoughts. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain. Stanley, how can you ask me to let this go? Mercy is our daughter. She's been hurt, and you want me to pretend like it didn't happen? Stanley sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know, Nne. I know it's hard, but what good will come from dragging this out? Oliver is Divine's son. If we go to the authorities, it will tear our families apart. Divine will never forgive us, and it will ruin Oliver's future. Can you live with that? Nne stared at him in disbelief. Can I live with that? Stanley, can you live with knowing that your daughter's innocence was taken from her and doing nothing about it? Can you live with knowing that the person who hurt her is walking free, unpunished? Stanley looked away, unable to meet her gaze. I am just trying to protect our family, Nne. This is bigger than just us. Nne's eyes filled with tears again. Protect our family, Stanley. Our family is already broken. Our daughter is broken, and you're asking me to keep quiet about it? How is that protecting anyone? Stanley stepped closer, reaching out to touch her arm, but Nne pulled away. Please, Nne, just think about it. We can find a way to move past this. But not if you hold on to it. Please, for the sake of our marriage. Nne shook her head, her heart aching. Stanley, I love you, but I can't ignore this. I can't let Mercy's pain be swept under the rug. I have to do what's right for her, even if it means losing everything else. Stanley's face hardened at her words. He stood there for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Nne standing there, tears streaming down her face. The day dragged on, with Nne feeling like she was moving through a fog. She couldn't bring herself to eat, and even though she tried to keep busy, her mind kept drifting back to the horrible choices she had to make. She kept replaying the moment when Mercy had confessed, seeing the fear in her daughter's eyes. It tore her apart to think that she might have to betray that trust. In the afternoon, Divine called, asking to speak to Stanley. Nne handed him the phone without a word. She could hear Divine's voice on the other end, but she couldn't make out what she was saying. Stanley's responses were short, and he didn't meet Nne's eyes while he spoke. When he hung up, he let out a long sigh. She's asking if we've made a decision, Stanley said quietly. Nne felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She knew what Divine was really asking. Would they keep quiet, or would they expose what had happened? She didn't say anything, just turned and walked away, needing space to think. Later that evening, Nne sat alone in her bedroom, staring out at the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, but she couldn't find any beauty in it. All she could think about was Mercy and the impossible choice before her. Stanley entered the room, sitting down beside her. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat there, looking as lost as she felt. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Nne, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. Nne turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. I don't want to lose you either, Stanley. But how can we be a family if we ignore what's happened? How can I look at Mercy and tell her that her pain doesn't matter? Stanley sighed, closing his eyes. I don't have the answers, Nne. I am scared too. But I am begging you, please, let's find a way to move on. We can't let this destroy us. Nne's heart broke all over again. She could see the fear in Stanley's eyes, the desperation. But she knew that no matter what she chose, there would be no way out, no easy way out. The damage had already been done, and now she had to decide what kind of future she wanted for her daughter, for herself, and for her marriage. The night stretched on, filled with silence and uncertainty. Nne lay awake, staring at the ceiling, praying for guidance, for strength, for the courage to do what was right. But as the hours passed, she felt no closer to an answer. All she knew was that the decision she made would change everything forever. The next morning, Nne woke up with a heavy heart. She had barely slept, her mind still churning with all the possibilities and consequences. She could hear Mercy stirring in her room, and the sound brought a fresh wave of pain. Nne knew she couldn't put off making a decision any longer. For the sake of her daughter, she had to choose a path forward. Stanley had already left for work. leaving Nne alone in the house with Mercy. As she prepared breakfast, she kept glancing at the door, waiting for her daughter to come out of her room. When Mercy finally appeared, Nne saw the shadow of sadness still hanging over her. Her daughter's smile, once so bright and full of life, was now faint and fleeting. Nne sat down next to Mercy, placing a hand on her small shoulder. "How are you feeling, my love?" she asked gently. Mercy shrugged, her eyes downcast. "I am okay, Mama." Nne's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter's forced calmness. She knew Mercy was trying to be brave, but it only made the situation more heartbreaking. Nne had always prided herself on being a strong mother, but now she felt like she was failing in the most important way. "Mercy," Nne began, her voice trembling. "I want you to know that what happened to you was not your fault. You did nothing wrong, and I am so proud of you for telling me the truth. You're such a brave girl." Mercy looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "But Mama, what's going to happen now? Is Oliver going to come back?" Nne shook her head firmly. "No, Mercy, he's not coming back. You're safe now, and I promise I'll do everything to protect you." Mercy nodded slowly, but Nne could see the lingering fear in her eyes. It broke her heart to think that her daughter might never feel completely safe again. Nne knew she had to make a decision, not just for Mercy, but for herself as well. After breakfast, Nne sat in the living room staring at her phone. She knew she needed to talk to someone, but she was unsure of who to call. Divine had made it clear that she wanted the matter to be kept quiet, but Nne couldn't let her daughter's pain be silenced. She needed to talk to someone who could help her see things clearly, someone who could understand the gravity of the situation. Nne decided to call her older brother, Emeka. He lived in another city, but they had always been close. Emeka was wise, and Nne trusted his judgment more than anyone else. She dialed his number, and after a few rings, he picked up. "Nne, my dear sister, how are you?" Emeka's warm voice greeted her. Nne's voice trembled as she responded, "Emeka, I need your help. Something terrible has happened." Immediately sensing her distress, Emeka's tone shifted. "What is it, Nne? What's wrong?" Nne took a deep breath and told her brother everything. About Oliver, about what he had done to Mercy, and about Stanley's plea to let it go. As she spoke, she could hear the anger rising in Emeka's voice, but he let her finish before responding. "Nne, this is serious," Emeka said, his voice tense with concern. "You cannot let this go. Mercy deserves justice, and Oliver needs to be held accountable for what he did. Stanley is wrong to ask you to keep quiet about this." "I know, Emeka," Nne replied, tears streaming down her face. "But I am so scared. If I push this, I might lose my marriage, and I don't know how to handle that. But I can't just ignore what happened to Mercy." Emeka's voice softened, filled with empathy. "I understand, Nne. This is a terrible situation, but you have to do what's right for Mercy. She's the one who needs you the most right now. As for Stanley, if he truly loves you and Mercy, he will understand why you have to do this. And if he doesn't, well, then you will know where his priorities really lie." Nne knew her brother was right. She couldn't let her fear of losing her marriage stop her from doing what was right for her daughter. "What should I do, Emeka? How do I make sure Mercy gets the justice she deserves?" "First, you need to take Mercy to the hospital," Emeka advised. "They can examine her and provide medical evidence of what happened. Then, you need to go to the police. I know it's scary, but this is the only way to ensure that Oliver faces the consequences of his actions. Nne nodded, though she knew Emeka couldn't see her. Thank you, Emeka. I'll do it. I'll protect Mercy, no matter what. Good, Emeka said, his voice filled with pride. And remember, Nne, you are not alone in this. I am here for you, and I'll support you every step of the way. After hanging up, Nne felt a sense of resolve settle over her. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant risking everything. She called Mercy over and told her they were going to the hospital. Mercy looked worried, but Nne reassured her that everything would be okay. As they drove to the hospital, Nne's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was determined to see it through. For Mercy's sake, she would fight for justice no matter the cost. At the hospital, the doctor was kind and understanding. He examined Mercy gently, explaining every step to her in a way that made her feel safe. After the examination, he confirmed Nne's worst fears. Mercy had indeed been deflowered, and there were signs of trauma. The doctor provided a medical report which Nne knew she would need when she went to the police. As they left the hospital, Nne held Mercy's hand tightly, drawing strength from the love she felt for her daughter. She knew she had done the right thing by coming here, but now came the hardest part, telling Stanley about her decision.